So it wasn't long ago when Coach Prime was first hired as the head coach of the Colorado Buffaloes that he instantly started generating headlines, and especially with his famous quote, "We're coming." But we need to fast forward because yesterday an article came out per CBS Sports that stated that the Colorado Buffaloes have been in talks with the Big 12, and today we've got to ask the question, could this mean Coach Prime in Colorado could look at the Pac-12 and say, we're leaving? Something we're going to discuss. But before we can, as always, y'all know the drill. I have got to hear from you. Hop down to the comments. Give me a Y for yes or an N for no. Do you believe that the Colorado Buffaloes will end up in the Big 12? And let me know what you're thinking. If you're new to the channel, be sure to subscribe. Hit that bell notification. I do constant college football content, and you don't want to miss any of it. If you enjoyed the content, be sure to like and comment down below. Those interactions seem small. They are massive to content creators such as myself, and both getting picked up and maintained by the YouTube algorithm. But having said all that, let's jump right into this. And this is a fascinating topic to me. The topic of conference realignment is something that's always piqued my interest, and especially when we're talking about the negotiations that the Pac-12 are currently facing for their TV media rights deal, because this has been a mess that stretched back for a year. And in order for us to really understand the conversation we need to have right now as it relates to Colorado and the Pac-12, we have to have some level of understanding of how we got here. And we need to go back a year. Whenever all these conferences were renegotiating their TV media rights deal, whenever the Big 10 had renegotiated their deal, everybody in college football felt good because the Big 10 got such a lucrative deal. And it seemed likely that the Pac-12 was next as they were approaching the deadline of their current deal. But the Big 12 leapfrogged the Pac-12 and got a deal done before they did. And in a lot of ways, that really hurt the Pac-12's negotiating stance because the Big 12 had signed a deal that was less than the Pac-12 commissioner had told every team in the Pac-12 they were going to get. Then the news comes that USC and UCLA will no longer be a part of the Pac, and that's a major monetary loss when you're talking about the markets that just walked out the door. Sure, some great markets still within the Pac-12, I grant you that, but USC and UCLA, when they're good, that's a massive market. So already the Pac-12 was on shaky grounds, but what's been more intriguing to me is the hand-sitting that's occurred, the fact that this has continued going and there's still no deal present. And that's a lot of information left out, but that's a fairly simplistic view as to how we got right here. It's basically the crash course to know, to understand why I'm so intrigued at this article in particular. Because whenever this article came up yesterday, the first thing I thought was less to do with Colorado potentially moving to the Big 12 and more to do with, wow, this is in no way, shape, or form a good thing for the Pac-12's negotiations. And what I mean when I say that, if you're going to the table negotiating with these TV rights, with these TV companies, and you're saying, hey, these are the teams we have at the table. You know, sure, USC, UCLA, they're no longer there, but look at all the eyes on Colorado. Dan Lanning at Oregon, he's doing something. Washington, Michael Penix, Oregon State, maybe. You can have all these negotiations, but at the point where the people who you're negotiating to, be it Apple, be it ESPN, be it Fox, they look at you and say, oh, well, that's interesting, but an article just came up that Colorado's talking to another conference. Are you sure they're going to be there? How do you know they're going to be there? At the point where teams are talking this openly to other conferences about exiting the Pac-12 tells me that first and foremost, the Pac-12 negotiations aren't going well, and secondly, there's no way this is a positive for Pac-12 negotiations ongoing in the future, because now these TV media rights companies are going to look at the Pac-12 and say, there's no guarantee that the teams you told us will be there will actually be there because you have teams talking to other conferences. And let's get one thing perfectly clear here. I do not fault any team within the Pac-12 for exploring their options because they have to look at the reality of the situation. Their deal ends really soon and there's nothing on the horizon. Everything has been pushed back. There's a lot of hand-sitting going on. And if we look at the attitude right now at Colorado, Coach Prime's not sitting on his hands. Coach Prime is about action right now, and unfortunately in the Pac-12, it's a lot of inaction right now. So what would this mean long-term if Colorado made the move to the Big 12? Well, personally, I have my favorite scenario, right? And if that happens, what it would mean is that the Colorado Buffaloes go to the Big 12, but they are not alone. They take the Arizona schools with them and Utah. And I think that would be a great move by the Big 12. At the point where you lose Texas and Oklahoma, that's huge monetary losses for the Big 12. But let's get one thing perfectly clear. The Big 12 didn't do what the Pac-12 is currently doing and sit on their hands. What the Big 12 did was renegotiate a TV media rights deal and then instantly add in 4 compelling brands into the conference to try and mitigate that loss. Something that I thought was a great move because you have to do something. You cannot rely on inaction. Action was the only way out. So when we look at this, adding in more of these teams for the Big 12 would be conducive to monetary success. But further than that, one of the biggest driving forces in college football are rivalries. College football and college football fandom by nature is tribal, right? It's one of the things that make college athletics so awesome. It's the tribalism that we see because the people who attend these schools, there's so much more personal attachment to a lot of these institutions for a lot of these fans, and that's what makes the fandom so powerful, so awesome, and that's what we love so much about college sports. But rivalries are a very powerful factor within college athletics. If you can get Utah on top of already having BYU and you can reignite the rivalry of Utah, BYU in the same conference, I think that's great for the bottom line of the Big 12, and I think that's really good for college football. But this question must be asked. What does this mean for the Pac-12? Because the Big 12 is just doing their due diligence. They see other conferences like the Big 10, like the SEC, and like the ACC, and they see that there's a lot of uneasiness right now in college football as to what the future of these conferences will look like. So instead of sitting there and waiting, they're trying to be proactive, and I can respect that. Whereas we look at the Pac-12, there's no action happening right now. And I've said it before in this video, I'm going to say it again. There's no way, shape, or form that when a team in your conference goes out and is having negotiations or at least talking to other conferences, that weakens your negotiation stance. Because you can't ask in good faith for this large sum of money, and then the TV media rights company you're negotiating with is just going to look at you and say there's no guarantee any of those teams are on board with what you're saying, because one of those teams you just propped up, being Colorado with all the attention that's there, they just got done talking to the Big 12, so what's your move? This is something that I find fascinating, how the Pac-12 has wound up where they are, not taking deals that were presented because, in my opinion, they overvalued the deal they could get, and especially once USC and UCLA left, and there was no sort of semblance as to a move on how to mitigate those losses, I think the Pac-12 had overestimated their value, and now they're looking around and seeing that, okay, well, this conference is getting paid, this conference is getting paid, and the ACC conference negotiations are a mess right now, but at least they have a long-term deal in place. At least they have something in place where our deal is about to expire, and there's nothing tangible on the horizon. Every day it's a new story. Whether it's the Oprah network going to pick up the Pac-12, whether it's ION, whether it's True TV, every day it's a new network. And what the Pac-12 really needs to do is settle on an environment. They have got to get this deal done, because teams negotiating openly with other conferences or teams talking openly to other conferences, that hurts your power as a conference, and that hurts your negotiation power. But this is going to be something we have got to watch, because Colorado could make a lot of money going from the Pac-12 to the Big 12. And the last point I'll make is this. Coach Prime lived in the state of Texas. Coach Prime has supreme familiarity in the state of Texas. And him having access to that recruiting ground, because he'd be in a conference where there are multiple Texas schools, would be a lot of fun to watch. Personally, I'm super excited to see what happens going forward. I think the Pac-12 is on shaky grounds, and I wouldn't be surprised at all to see a move being made. So hop down to the comments, let me know what you're thinking. That's it. See ya.